This is Solve It for Kids.
Hello, my amazing and curious friends. My name is Jennifer, the Dean of all things STEM and STEAM, and this is Solve It for Kids, the science podcast that gives kids and families a peek inside the real world of scientists, engineers, and experts as they solve problems in their jobs using creativity, cooperation, and critical thinking. And now please welcome to the show my podcast partner, Galactic Space Geek, Jeff Gagne.
Hello, Jennifer, and hello, listeners. No matter which type, we all love animals, but we may have a guest today who loves them just a little bit more than some of the rest of us.
That is absolutely true. So what problem are we solving today?
How do animals change over time?
How do animals change over time? You know, this could go anywhere with this discussion. I'm very curious to hear what we're going to talk about. Who is our guest today, Jeff?
Our guest is the awesome Alex Ray. He is the host of On Wildlife and self-professed animal connoisseur.
Welcome to the show, Alex.
Thank you so much. It's great to be here, guys. I really appreciate you having me on today.
Yeah, well, we are thrilled to have you. I mean, fellow podcaster here, so
Yes.
you know, we got to support each other. But also, you have such cool topics on your podcast, so we can't wait to talk about the topic with us today. But my first question is always: were you a kid who loved animals?
Absolutely. I loved animals ever since I was born. I would go outside in my backyard looking under rocks, trying to find salamanders, trying to find birds and everything. That was how it all started for me.
Cool.
Okay, let me ask, where did you grow up and what was abundant for animals there?
Yeah,
I grew up in New Jersey, so not many reptiles and amphibians, a few salamanders if I could find them in the summertime, and a lot of roly-polies. And a lot of centipedes and ants and all that fun stuff.
Okay.
So did you have any of them as pets?
I did have a couple turtles as pets. One of them ran away, though, unfortunately.
Oh.
Your turtle ran away?
Very, very slowly?
Are you messing with us? Please explain.
I let him outside for too long.
Okay.
Couldn't figure out which direction he slowly turtled off to?
Yeah. Oh my gosh. So when you were looking at all these animals, were you like observing them, or, you know, did you have like a cool science journal that you wrote stuff in or drew pictures about? Like, why were you so curious about these animals?
Well, I had a video camera when I was little. We didn't have phones with cameras on them back when I was younger. So I would go outside and try to record them. And I just kind of looked at the patterns. Salamanders have really cool patterns on their back that I love to observe, and just got to look at their behaviors. What happened when I lifted up that rock? Did they scurry away? Were they just chilling and didn't really mind me being there? So I love to just see what they were doing when I was observing them.
That's cool. Yeah.
Cool. So we've been talking about smaller animals. In your house, did you have pets that eventually got bigger than turtles?
Absolutely. I had 2 dogs, and I also had some ferrets.
Oh.
Yeah, and I did have a gecko. I had a lot of weird, cool animals.
Okay. I bet your friends loved coming to your house.
Oh, absolutely. Except for one that was petrified of dogs, but...
Oh, well. So how did you move from, you know, animals as a kid? Like, what did you study in college, and kind of, you know, how did you continue your interest in animals?
Yeah, I just knew from a very young age that I loved science. And I really enjoyed science class. And when I talked to my friends, none of them really seemed to be as interested as I was in science. And I'm just thinking to myself, how could you not be interested in this? It's so cool.
Right.
Agreed.
Yes.
learning the way the world works. And then it kind of hit me. I want to share my love of science with other people. And so when I went to college, I decided to become a biology teacher. So that's what I had been doing for a few years, and I really loved it. It was a really great career, and I had a blast teaching kids all the way from middle school to high school.
Oh, that's so fun.
Okay. So while we're on that biology teacher, before we get specifically to our question for this, what was a topic in biology that you noticed really got the kids and your students interested?
I think ecology was something that really got the students interested. So like I would show videos of animals on the African plains interacting with each other, and we would kind of make observations about what they would do and what role each organism played in its environment. And I think that really resonated with a lot of kids because I think all of us at heart are animal lovers.
Yeah, well, and I think if you did it that way, also, you can kind of connect things, which is always great in learning and teaching. You know, if you connect it to, you learn kind of through the book, and then you get to see it happen. That's why I love science too, is yes, it's great to read, learn, but it's even more cool to do the experience or make the observations kind of things. So like, what are some of the things you can think of that kids got really excited about learning?
I think one of the things was just the roles that different organisms played in the ecosystem. So they really liked learning about how, I would give the example of sea otters, and their main prey is sea urchins. So they would eat the sea urchins, and basically if the sea otters were taken out of the environment, then the urchins would take over and they would eat all the kelp, which would then kind of ruin the ecosystem. So I got to talk a lot about our changing planet and what's going on with just how humans have impacted our world.
Yeah, that's very important. That's great.
Yes. And that leads us right into our main question for this episode of how do animals change over time?
Mm-hmm.
Giant question.
I know, right? Where do you want to start with this one, Alex?
I actually I prepped just in case this was going to fall on my question side. As a now podcaster talking about wildlife all the time and a biology teacher, where do you get us started on such a large question?
That is a great question. I love to start with taking a specific animal and looking at why they have certain traits and kind of seeing what the purpose of each specific trait is and how they may have evolved to get that trait and why they did.
Okay.
Can you give us some examples there?
Yeah, absolutely. So I'll take the example of, let's say, an iguana.
Okay.
So in iguanas, think about where they might live, right? They live in tropical areas with lots of trees, lots of greenery, and their skin is green, right? So we can make the connection of why do you think their skin is green?
Yeah, for camouflage.
Exactly.
Yeah.
Right. So that they can blend in with the environment and avoid predators. And you could also look at their feet. They have really long, sharp claws, and they also love to climb trees. So this is like their way of basically having a niche or a place in the ecosystem where they can avoid predators and they're best adapted, best suited for their environment.
Yeah, exactly. So, I mean, can you think of some other animals that they have adapted? I mean, I know there's probably tons of examples out there, but, what else do you have for us?
I do have a really interesting example that it kind of spans across multiple animals.
Okay.
Going into the ocean, if you have ever looked at like a killer whale or a penguin or a shark, you'll notice that on their backs, they have a darker pigmentation, right?
Yep.
Darker color. And then on their
Right.
bellies, they have lighter pigmentation,
Yep.
right?
Okay.
And so we kind of figured out over time that they have all adapted to have this, because when you are a sea creature looking up at an animal with really light pigmentation on their belly,
Right.
it's really hard to see them.
Yep.
And if you're
That's
looking
true.
Right.
down and you're looking at the depths of the ocean and looking down on that animal and they have a dark pigmentation, then it's really hard to see them too. So it's a
Yes.
way of avoiding detection.
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah.
I like that. That's a great example over several species.
Thank you.
So changes like those, that if an animal didn't start with that, how long do those take? Are we talking weeks, years, hundreds, millions of years?
That's the thing about evolution, is that, first of all, it depends on the species, but overall, it takes millions of years for something like that to happen,
Yeah.
especially with larger organisms. If you're looking at bacteria, really, really tiny organisms that reproduce really quickly, then that
Right.
evolution can happen at a much faster pace.
Okay.
Yes. Yeah, exactly. How did you talk to your students about this? Did you have them study this evolution of animals and the changes in the traits? Did you have them maybe come up with design their own animal, right? And see how it might evolve?
Absolutely. I had a lot of cool like computer games where they could design their own animal
Ah,
and see
All
how
right.
it survived and it changed over time. And there was one game that I really loved, which was, we had an environment that you could either make as a snowy environment or a rocky environment.
oh,
And we had bunnies
Okay.
that either had lighter or darker skin or
Okay.
darker fur.
right.
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 So we could see the animals that survived in different types of environments based on their
Yeah.
fur color and based on them blending in, because their predators, wolves, would be able to see them more easily if they were a black pigmentation in a snowy environment.
Oh, yeah. Right.
Right.
Yeah.
Okay. I like the fact that you included games and had your students doing that rather than just sitting back and learning about that. It lends me to bringing all that evolution sort of right up to today. Like, okay, bunnies have, just using that last example, bunnies have that kind of fur, white fur in a snowy region, darker fur in a rocky region. Do animal scientists sort of project out evolution in terms of what changes may happen based on what we know is happening to planet Earth right now?
That's a good question. I think that they do. They definitely do. And I think we're already starting to see changes, maybe not physical traits that they
Right.
have, physical characteristics, but definitely behavioral characteristics. One
Okay.
example that I can think of is seagulls. They did a study on seagulls and they found that a seagull would actually rather eat the same piece of food when it was touched by a person first, rather than a piece of food that was not touched by a person, even if it was the same piece of food.
Really?
Yeah.
Mhm.
So what does that tell you though about the animals?
That tells you that they have learned that humans are their main food provider now, because people are very lackadaisical with their
Oh.
food. They'll throw them to the seagulls, throw bread because they think it's funny.
Okay.
And
Right.
our food probably tastes better than a raw fish. So they're
Okay.
going to want to go more towards our food, and it's so easily available. They don't have to hunt for it. We just give it to them.
Yeah. Well, and that's why you see signs everywhere saying don't feed the animals, because they need to be able to find their own. And yeah, sometimes that means they have to go hunting for the fish instead of just eat the bread off the ground. So, do you remember any of the animals that your students may have designed? Because I find that interesting to see, could they change color? Could they change, they could change environments? Could they change like body shape or like kind of what they could do with their like hands or paws or claws or whatever they had.
Yeah, I think one thing that they really focused on was changing if we're still thinking about the bunnies, but this also applies to a lot of other animals too, the length of their teeth and what food types they might be eating.
Okay, yeah.
So if they're eating a really long grain grass or something like that, then they're going to have longer teeth, adapt to have longer teeth over time because of the amount of munching that they're going to have to do. It wears the teeth down. Yes. Whereas if they have shorter teeth, they are more suited for a different type of food.
Yeah, that's true.
Okay.
That those are all cool things. I mean, that would be a cool program. I'd love to play with that, design different kinds of animals and see how it, puts them in the environments and then kind of see how they interact. So is that how it works? Like you kind of pick your animal and then you stick it somewhere and then you run the simulation to see how they do? Yeah.
Yeah, and you kind of run it over like thousands or millions of years. And you kind of let the days go by and you'll see, of course, something really important about evolution is that it doesn't happen to individuals. It happens to populations. So one animal isn't going to change their body shape or change the color of their fur over the course of 10 years. It's going to be an entire population that changes over time. So you'll be able to see the amount of your animals in the population that have this trait versus that trait and which traits kind of win over after a certain period of time.
Okay. That's cool. Yeah.
Yeah. I feel like we just got real close to connecting with Darwin in terms of survival of the fittest and what works gets to stay. Do you have maybe a favorite animal that in all of your wildlife studies and learning and podcasting about with their evolution and their changes has just been something that's caught you?
Yeah, I think if we're talking about Darwin, I love to think about the finches that he observed.
Yep.
So when he was studying the Galapagos Islands, he found that different birds were very similar, but they had slightly different traits on different islands.
Yep.
Because he found that there were different food sources that were on those specific islands. So there were birds with really, really thick beaks on one island. And he found that on that island, there were nuts, which were their main source of food, were really hard to crack open. So the thick beaks were really helpful in cracking those nuts open. And then he went to another island and there were really, really tiny, thin beaks. And he found that their food source was really small and it was much easier to pick up those tiny pieces of food with a small beak than a really big, thick beak. So he kind of observed how populations would change over time based on what was available in their environment.
Yeah. And that was, groundbreaking. And that's kind of how we've set everything up since then. So are your students able to do any kind of experiments about this? I mean, not necessarily experimenting on animals, but I mean, kind of theoretical experiments or whatever, where they can, figure out how, maybe even genetics plays a part in this?
It is hard to do an experiment that you can observe evolution because it just happens over so long of a time period. But we were able to do something called, which this is a really long, confusing word, but it's called gel electrophoresis. And basically, you take DNA from different animals, or even you can do different individuals of the same animal, and you put them in this jelly-like substance, and you run electricity through it. And basically, the DNA starts to separate out into different bars on the gel.
Oh, wow.
And you can compare the bars between the individuals to determine how closely related they are. And basically, this whole experiment separates the DNA strands based on size. So the longer, really longer pieces, like to stay towards the front because they can't move as fast as the really short pieces of DNA. And it basically just separates out all the different DNA strands, and you can compare them to see how closely related two individuals are. And they actually use this in like the forensic sciences to determine DNA at a crime scene. You can use this in paternity tests, things like that.
Yeah. Oh, that's really cool.
Kidding.
That's some cutting edge technology you have your students working with. That's pretty cool.
Yeah, we're lucky to have that.
Literally. And I think we started this podcast off with science is awesome.
Yes.
How does everybody not like this? Well, we all do. Maybe we just haven't realized that, we've been watching CSI on TV, not realizing that it's the DNA science that's catching us. That is really cool. So we've mentioned it a couple of times. You have your own podcast called On Wildlife. This is going to sound like a ridiculous question. What do you talk about on that podcast?
We talk about animals. That's all we talk about pretty much. Each episode, I talk about a different animal and I go in depth about them. So just recently, I talked about vultures and I talked about what they eat, what their adaptations are, and maybe what they're struggling with now with our human interventions. Yeah, that's basically all that I talk about, and I love it.
Yeah, that's great. So can you give us, some of the other animals and examples that you do on the podcast, and like how long is it, and tell everybody where they can find your podcast?
Yeah, absolutely. So the episodes are about 15 minutes and it depends. Sometimes I'll have guests on. So those are a little longer episodes. And then sometimes it's just me talking about an animal. So those are the kind of the shorter episodes. And you can find the podcast on Spotify, Apple Podcasts, anywhere you listen to podcasts. Oh, you can also visit our website at onwildlife.org.
There you go.
Excellent.
Yeah, it's lots of fun podcast. Yeah. So everybody should check this one out.
I would love to know a couple more of your favorite episodes where you have talked about a specific animal and then maybe something specific about one or two of them.
Yeah, I really loved talking about ants because ants are just insane animals.
And everywhere.
Yes, and the stuff that you will hear about ants, it just sounds like it's out of science fiction. Something that I love to talk about is that ants were farming before we were farming.
True.
Basically, you have these leaf cutter ants, and everybody thinks that they eat leaves, but they don't actually eat the leaves. What they do is they cut the leaves off of trees, they bring them back to their hive or their mound, and then they chew up the leaves and they use that kind of as like a fertilizer for bacteria and fungus that they then eat.
That they then eat, yes.
Yeah.
Yes.
So I just think it's really insane, and they did it first.
Yeah, they did.
I mean, love it.
Ants are pretty cool. So do you cover insects, mammals, all different kinds? Yeah. Do you take requests? Do people send you one saying, hey, can you tell us about this animal?
I love getting requests, and I try. Well, first of all, if you have a request, you can always email us at onwildlife.podcast@gmail.com, and I will give you a shout out on the episode for
we might have
suggesting the animal.
Cool.
Yeah.
I'd love for you guys to suggest one.
Koala bear. That's mine. My favorite. Talk about koala bears.
Have to put a little thinking. I've got something going through my head, so I want to just pick one. But I will for sure. So, do you ever or have you ever talked about extinct animals on the podcast?
Yes, we have. And I actually got to talk to a really cool person who studied coprolites, which is fossilized animal dung, animal poop. It was really cool, and you can actually learn a lot about what they ate and where they lived and all these kinds of cool stuff just based on that.
Yep.
Very cool.
I'm trying to remember if we've had it. I mean, we've had over 200 episodes, but I think we've had a person on the episode talking about this, or it's possible I just researched it for one of my books because it all runs together. But
really had dung beetles.
Yes, we did have dung beetles, but I'm pretty sure we had somebody else who talked about that too. But it is a very intriguing topic. I mean, there's very little of science that I don't find interesting. I think there's something cool in everything, whatever you're looking at. But yes, so everyone needs to go check out your podcast because that would be lots of fun. And you can always, if you suggest something, tell Alex that you heard him here on our podcast, Solve for Kids. But we are at that time in our show where we ask our guests to give our listeners a challenge. So what is your challenge, Alex?
My challenge for you is to go outside and observe a plant or an animal and write down some of their characteristics. And then I want you to think about why they may have evolved to have those characteristics in their environment.
Ooh, I like that one.
I like it.
I like it. So that'll get people outside, right?
Mm-hmm.
Doing some observation, which is what all scientists like to do. But I love that. Think about how they got that and then maybe even go look it up and see if you're right. Right?
Yes, absolutely.
Because what you may think may not be, because some of these animals and plants, their adaptations developed in kind of weird ways, right?
Definitely. And there's scientists that have gotten it wrong many times before. Thinking this is why they do this, and that's not the case.
Or it changes, right?
Yes.
They think this is why it happened. But now we know differently that it's something else, which is also, I love to do that when I talk to kids at school. I was like, science changes. So you have to that's why you have to keep doing the research and reading up on it.
Definitely.
And I would love to add the tiniest little bit to your challenge because I really like that. If you're listening, you do this challenge, then go on to the On Wildlife podcast and listen to Alex's episode about whatever animal that you were just doing that challenge about.
That's a great idea.
Yeah, that would be fun. Well, this has been so much fun. I've enjoyed learning about animals and talking about animal evolution. Thank you so much for being on Solve It for Kids, Alex.
Thank you, Alex.
Thank you guys for having me so much. I had such a blast.
What a fun episode, and really got me thinking about how I actually see the animals that are in my world around me, the deer, the birds, the squirrels, whatever it is, and thinking just a little bit deeper on why those animals are exactly the way they are now.
Yeah, exactly. It was so fun to discuss all of the different kinds of animals and to think about all of these things. And I love his challenge. I mean, we always love the challenge where we're like, go outside, right? And observe, be a scientist, right?
Yes, and Alex is definitely turning us into scientists rather than just observing a plant or an animal is just step one. Then he wants us to write down the characteristics of that plant or animal, and especially for those animals, then think about why that animal evolved to have those characteristics. Very cool activity to do.
It is, and it's something when you sit down and you kind of study the animals, you can kind of see, and then you could even go and do research, which of course I love to do as a nonfiction author. You can go research and learn more and kind of go backwards from that. So if any of you do that and you would like to share the results of your research and what you learned with us, we'd love to hear from you. We are on social media. We are at KidSolve at Facebook, X, and Instagram. And don't forget to check out our website, solveitforkids.com, where you can find information about this episode and all of our other episodes. So you can go back and listen to, you can even search for wildlife and listen to all of our animal podcasts, which might take you a while, but they're very fun. So check it out.
Absolutely do that. Until next time, Jen and I will be checking out different animals between Florida for her and Colorado for me. This is the Science Podcast for kids and families. Until next time, you'll hear Jen and Jeff on Solve it for kids.